Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. You know, it's just a fact that every time Fat Joe is ever mentioned, it's never for a good reason. I heard a nasty little rumor that he was threatening to release another album, but fortunately that didn't happen. And speaking of nasty rumors, Tyler Perry's not the only one getting dragged into court though. There are allegations being thrown at Fat Joe by one of his former hype men. He couldn't even get accusations from a stripper or some groupie. It was one of his former hype men saying stuff about him. In December of 2023, Terrence Dixon went on social media and accused Fat Joe of being a pedophile among numerous other salacious gossip. Well, in April of this year, Fat Joe filed a slander lawsuit against Dixon, and last Thursday, Dixon filed a federal lawsuit alleging that Fat Joe underpaid Dixon, cut him out of promised pay for contributing to album tracks, defrauded authorities about his income, ditched Dixon in foreign countries without money or transportation home, and is running a criminal organization built on intimidation and violence. So he's accusing the Latin lard bottom of everything from failure to pay his employees, to failure to pay taxes, to running a criminal organization. That's just another word for RICO. So we can see where someone would like for this lawsuit to go. This is being dangled as bait in front of prosecutors. The lawsuit also alleges that Fat Joe forced Dixon into approximately 4,000 sex acts with women in front of him and his crew. Sounds just like the kinds of accusations that were made against Lizzo, don't it? What is it about these morbidly obese, overrated music hacks and them making their employees engage in sex acts with other people? Well, I guess since neither Lizzo nor Fat Joe can find their genitals under all those layers of flab, they might as well watch because they can't participate. But that's what gets me about this lawsuit. Dixon's saying this happened approximately 4,000 times, approximately 4,000 sex acts. Believe it or not, I'm actually inclined to believe that totally, because think about it. Approximately 4,000 sex acts that he says he was forced to engage in. 4,000. For him to be keeping track of a number that large, what that means is he was being psychologically and spiritually scarred by all of this. But then again, having to hang around Fat Joe day in and day out, well, that could psychologically scar you too. However, there's one accusation that Dixon leveled at Fat Joe that's impossible to make light of. Dixon's also accusing Joe of having sex with girls who were ages 15 and 16, and that one of his songs had lyrics based on these alleged sexual incidents. Well, you gotta give Blubberman credit for one thing. If you're looking to hide evidence of a crime, you might as well put it in a Fat Joe record because nobody will ever look there. But think about it. Tax evasion, RICO, incriminating lyrics, all of the catnip that the white media usually jumps on. Somebody's going for the trifecta with this lawsuit. And Dixon's lawyer, by the way, is also the guy who sued Diddy last year, though the white media did make sure to point out that much of that lawsuit got tossed out. Though it seems this time around, Dixon's lawyer isn't leaving this one up to chance. He's throwing everything plus the kitchen sink at this one, even going so far as to say that Fat Joe learned nothing from his other federal conviction back in 2013 when he had to serve a 4-month sentence and pay a fine for failure to pay his taxes. I, for one, get a kick out of the clowns who are trying to say that this suit against Fat Joe is part of an attack on hip-hop. Well, first of all, Fat Joe is not a rapper. Even the LA Times article about him, in fact, most of the white media headlines about this case don't call him a rapper in the headline. So, Fat Joe the comedian, perhaps. Fat Joe the lounge singer? Could be anything. The point is, he's a poser, not a rapper. And after the low-key and overt grimy crap that he said about black culture, he gets no sympathy from me and he shouldn't get any from you. People are always culture vulturing off of us, using our culture to invigorate their own and to enrich themselves. And then they try to legitimize this theft after the fact by lying and claiming that they were there from the very beginning, and lying and saying that they were making valuable contributions. This is how nobodies like Rick Rubin can have the white media invent a myth for them, claiming that Rubin was one of the founders of rap music, when in reality he was just a white guy who worked for a record label. He invented nothing, he created nothing, but he sure got paid for a lot, didn't he? He's not a creative, because he didn't create anything. He was a middleman. But he's not black, and certainly not a foundational black American, so that being the case, yeah, he gets to go ahead and have the white media manufacture some sort of legend that he's just this extraordinary music producer, and he was a visionary that helped to bring rap music into the world. But this is what the white media's always done. Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis Presley were white guys doing their own yokel impersonation of black music. But the white media still lies and calls them rock and roll pioneers, when they actually came along over a decade after the genre was already born. These guys didn't make anything, didn't pioneer anything. All they did was they sat at black folks' tables and started chowing down. That's how it is with anything that we create. Whenever other groups create stuff, that's always private. It's always proprietary. It's specific to that culture. Nobody's supposed to intrude. But when it comes to black people, anything that we create, anything that we accomplish, everything from our music to our historical contributions, why, that's community property. It belongs to everybody. Everybody has a claim to it. If there's some white person who was in the next state over, the white media will lie and claim that that guy was the real person who invented whatever we made. They'll lie and make them the center of our story. White power led all kinds of morons and idiots who contributed nothing into the industry that we created, and then these talentless nobodies proceeded to make a mockery out of what it took genius to make. And they also made a lot of money that they didn't truly earn. That's part of why it was so easy for people like myself to start walking away from these things back in the 90s. White money was infiltrating and poisoning the well, promoting all these fools who had no talent and nothing to say, while making sure to downplay and ignore black people who actually were doing things that were valuable, and using their media monopoly to praise these clowns and act like they were a vital part of an art form that they were actually bastardizing. People like Fat Joe and Rick Rubin, these parasites didn't pioneer anything. They didn't blaze any trails. In fact, they were part of the obstacles that we had to overcome. They were part of the problem. And it's not some victimless crime whenever you got these simple-minded Negroes running around trying to act like, oh man, they's down with the community. They're down with nothing. These were agents of white supremacy come amongst us, as they always do, muddying the waters, because that's how cultural appropriation is done, by sowing confusion. And then afterwards, they turn around and say, well, black people didn't really create this or that. I mean, these black people, they never really contribute anything. It's part of how white power controls the public mind. By manufacturing these lies, basically making sure that everybody else gets to take credit for what we've done, and always making it where black people have to justify and re-justify the things that we have done while they tell everybody we didn't do anything. It's meant to create the societal fiction that black people are basically worthless and didn't make any contributions, and anything that they say they did, well, it was a non-black person who was really responsible for it. And yet, with Fat Joe's situation, you can bet on cue we're going to get these brain-dead Negroes who work for these white radio stations, and they'll be the ones talking like Fat Joe should be in the same category as the other constant lawsuits and criminal prosecution of black celebrities. Never mind the fact that it's black people calling this guy out. That's not going to go to their minds. Instead, it's going to be the usual bootlick virtue signaling. That's what these guys will be doing. It wouldn't surprise me at all if you had Charlemagne the Fraud and the rest of the breakfast schlubs bringing in Fat Joe for an interview and saying, Massa, boss, tell us what's wrong. What's this mean old Negro saying about you? Well, you know what? I, for one, say that we should do a crowdfunding for Fat Joe's legal defense. It'll be the most money that he's gotten in years. And then we can sit back and wait and see if the white powers that be are going to be consistent and decide that this will be the entree for a criminal case. Because, of course, if Fat Joe actually was down with the community, they would have already been bringing criminal charges before now. So I'm going to close this out in a kind of unusual way. Fat Joe falsely claimed that hip-hop's origins are actually Puerto Rican. He offered absolutely no evidence for this because there is none. But since he insisted on it, I've decided that maybe we should at least pay lip service to the idea that rap has some kind of imaginary Latin roots. And that being the case, it's not right to call Fat Joe, well, Fat Joe, because in Spanish, there's no J sound. Instead, the J functions like an H. That's why names like Jose and Julio aren't pronounced Jose and Julio. And that being the case, I think in recognition of the imaginary Latin roots of hip-hop, we should take its biggest culture vulture, its biggest contributor, pun intended, and let's properly pronounce his name. Fat Ho. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. L. Ransom, Samora Morris, LB, Mark Stroud, and Johnny Martin. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.